Hi guys, my name's Sophie and today I'm going to be doing a book review. So I was not planning to be filming anything today or in the past couple of days because, like I said in a previous video, I haven't been very well. As you can probably tell from my voice, probably not sounding the same as it should, but I've read 2 books in the past week that I really want to talk about, and I've got a list of books before that I want to talk about that as well, and I just had about 1,000 things that I wanted to review or talk about for some reason, so I'm going to do a book review. The book that I'm going to be reviewing today is Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell. Feels a little bit shameful to admit this, considering that I've been raised by 2 ridiculously politically active people and politically aware people, but this is my first Orwell novel, and I feel like I'm lying to the world because this was my first Orwell novel. Like, I know the concept of 1984 and of Animal Farm, and like, I know a lot of stuff because I've had the conversations where people tell me the storyline, but I have never read the books before. So this was the first of his novels that I read, and I've been wanting to read an Orwell book for a very long time, and then I sent one to a friend. I sent this one, actually, to my friend Ariel, who, if you haven't found her booktube channel, I don't understand how you found mine, because that's strange. But I will leave her channel in the link below. But so I sent her this book, and my dad kind of came up to me after I'd sent the book and he was like, you know that when she finishes it, she's gonna want to talk to you about it because she'll think that you've read this book that you sent her. And like, really hadn't dawned on me that I would, like, that anyone would assume that I'd read this book, which of course it should have, because I'd sent it to someone else. But so I immediately grabbed a copy of Homage to Catalonia and forced myself to read it. And I say that not because I didn't enjoy this book. I thought this was a fantastic book. But this took me near on 6 days to finish. And considering that it's only 196 pages of actual story and then like another, I don't know, 50 pages of index. I didn't read the 50 pages of index for reasons that I will get onto, but considering that this is only just about 200 pages, the fact that it took me nearly 6 days is something that I am quite upset by. But the reason that it took so long is that this book, unlike a novel, you have to really, really think about it. Because a lot of the stuff that happens, although it is in chronological order and is technically a story, you have to constantly think about stuff because there's no real description, there's no characteristic description or layout description, and when there is layout description, it's usually to do with like this was here and that was there. It's never how anything looks, which like is what you'd expect from a book like this, but does take some thinking about, and the political side of it takes a lot of mental energy. So I'd get through about 30 pages and have to stop and kind of process what I just read, a lot more than I would with a novel, with, you know, even a George Orwell novel that's kind of a fictional story. So I've started Animal Farm, and that doesn't take anywhere near as much kind of brain power to read and to process. But like I said, this book, oh my god, this book, it was so good. 5 out of 5 stars, hands down. Basically, this is a memoir of George Orwell, who was this guy who was alive in the 20th century. He died about 60 years ago, and he was a socialist, anarchist, communist person, depending when you asked him, who thought about a lot of stuff and got involved in fighting fascism and stuff, but he also wrote a lot of books. His most famous are kind of 1984, which is where you get the term Big Brother from, and Animal Farm, which is the phrase everyone's equal but some people are more equal than others. And he writes fantastic literature, but he also writes a lot of essays and a lot of non-fiction, and this is one of his non-fiction books, which is about him travelling over to Spain in 1936, which is kind of the midst of the Spanish Revolution, Spanish Civil War revolution. If if you're on the side of the workers, it was a revolution. If you're on the side of the Stalinists at the time, then it was a civil war. History gets complicated, doesn't it? And it's about his kind of time in the militia armies and what happened and why he had to leave Spain. Like I said, it's the only Orwell novel that I've read, so I can't compare it to other Orwell books. I don't know if this is his best bit of work, I don't know if it's the worst, but I loved it. I'm so glad I read this book, because one of the things that I get really disheartened about talking about politics, especially talking about socialism and can't get my words up, especially when I talk about socialism and communism and Marxism, is the horrible kind of attitude that a lot of people have, that if you stop giving people incentives, or like if you stop forcing people to do stuff really, then they just won't do it. So in the army, unless they're being paid to be there, which is the incentive, and kind of threatened with death at the like far end of the spectrum, and kind of like firing and docked pay and yelling at and stuff. Whereas in this, because it's a militia, it's a socialist slash anarchist slash communist army, like all of the people, the sergeants and the privates and the generals, are all on the same level. They all get paid the same amount of money, and when an order is given, people can disagree with it. Like, they're allowed to kind of say, well, that seems really stupid, why are we doing that? And the people who give the orders explain why they're doing that. And people, like, more enthusiastically than in other armies, are happy to die for what they're doing, because they know what they're doing and why they're doing it, and they honestly believe in every action that they're taking, a lot more than you would in like a capitalist army. And Orwell's explanation of that was beautiful, and people talking about socialism, it makes me so happy. Like, all of these, there's not many, because I didn't want to go overboard. Literally, as I was reading this, I was just like, sentence, 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 sentence. Oh my god, I need to highlight this paragraph. Which, it's not helpful, because like I said, the book is nearly 200 pages long, and to highlight every paragraph, I just have a very, very bright book. And it's not really highlighting then, it's just colouring in. There's a bit kind of towards the end of the story that I found really heartbreaking, which is that after the government has outlawed the militia that he's part of, the POUM, he is kind of, everyone who was a member of the POUM has to be arrested and is arrested, so he's kind of on the run, effectively. But while they were arresting all of his kind of co-workers in that militia, he was on train, so they didn't catch him. And when they came to search the hotel that his wife was staying in Barcelona, the kind of police of the city that had come to arrest him searched their kind of suite in the hotel, and they took all of the paper documents that were in their apartment. So the only things that they were left with were their passports and their like identification documents, but they took all of his books, they took all of their letters, so like letters from him to her while he was on the front line, from people that had written to George Orwell about his previous books, like fan letters. He'd taken them with him to reply to them when he was on leave, and the government took the letters and he never gets them back. And like all of his diaries, so he's been keeping diaries the whole time that he's in Spain, and I'm assuming from before then as well, and they just take them and he never gets them back. And that to me was such a heartbreaking thing. Like, it's not the most heartbreaking thing in this book, there's a lot of stuff that I kind of felt really sorry for a lot of people in this war, but that kind of drove home to me that even if you weren't physically damaged from this war, there was a lot of repercussions. And also the idea of someone taking things that are so private to me, like, I'm obsessed with books. If someone stole my books and my diaries and kind of my letters, I would feel like such an important part of my life had been taken from me, and that really upset me. But I thought, Oh, I wanted to highlight that because I think it's such an interesting thing to include in a book like this. Let's see what else I really liked about this book. Like, I liked all of it. One thing that I do want to say, if you are interested in reading this book, you should definitely, either beforehand or after you've finished it, watch a film called Land of Freedom, which is not technically based around this book, and I watched the film way before I ever read this book. But reading this book, I was just like, they literally just lifted this book and put it into a script, and that's all this film is. So the film centres around this guy who comes over from England and joins one of the militias, and it's about his story fighting in Spain against fascism. And this book is Orwell coming over from England to join a militia and fight fascism. And like literally everything is really similar. The only difference, major difference really, is that in the film the main character has this like love interest relationship, whereas in this, Orwell's married, so there's no romance really. But yeah, that film is really good and helped a lot when I was struggling to place things. It helped quite a lot because you get to see things as well as just read them, which usually I have no issue with, but I don't know the history of the Spanish Revolution that well, so it was difficult. I want to read you an excerpt that he writes, literally like the penultimate page of the kind of story bit of this book, and he says, "In case I have not said this somewhere earlier in the book, I will say it now. Beware of my partisanship, my mistakes of fact, and the distortion inevitably caused by my having seen only one corner of events, and beware of exactly the same thing when you read any other book on this period of the Spanish War." And that, basically, the thing of that sentence means, don't trust anyone on history. And I think that's such a brilliant thing for a historian, because that's effectively what he is, he's a historian. And I think that's such a brilliant thing for a historian to say. I studied history for the past 3 years, and literally every lesson was filled with my teacher saying, don't trust anyone on history. It's all lies. They have no idea what they're talking about. They only know their version of events. And sometimes their version of events works. Sometimes it doesn't. And you need to be aware of that. You can't trust anyone 100%. Like, I think this is a fantastic book, but I should never base all of my opinions about the Spanish Civil War on this book. Because George Orwell was only there for like 8 months, and he's not Spanish, and he wasn't working class Spanish, and he wasn't at every front line, and he was only on the front line for a certain number of months, and he wasn't there after the war, and he wasn't there before the war. He was only there for 6 months, and so that's such a tiny, tiny version of those events that there's no way I could get a full picture. So there's no way that I should think of it as a full picture, because it's not, and I think that's such a brilliant thing for a historian to say. I also want to read you a quote from the first page of the appendix. So the appendix in this edition of the book, which, can I just say, I really don't like this cover. It doesn't have that much to do with the book. Like, he gets a pistol at one point, but that's not really, like, I like some of the other covers better. But the appendix, he wrote, in this version of the book, there are 12 chapters and 2 appendices, something, plural of appendix. And they were originally chapters 5 and chapters 10, I think, and so there would have been 14 chapters, but those 2 specific chapters focused on the inter-militia politics, which a lot of people will find very dull, because it's really like, you know how I said that it takes you like a lot of brain power? Imagine that threefold for those specific chapters, because the number of different types of militia and which party affiliation they all have, and whether they're communist and which kind of communist, because there's like 5 different main sorts and then there's branches off of those, and whether they're anarchist communists or whether they're just socialists, and why they're fighting, and are they fighting for something or just against something, and it makes your head hurt. So when they did a revise of this publication, when he did the 2nd edition, he and his publishers kind of came to an agreement whereby those 2 chapters would be lifted from the kind of continual storyline and put at the back as appendixes, because they don't add anything to the storyline, but they give a lot more depth to the history of the war. And so I didn't read the 2 appendixes, mainly because, like I said, it took me 6 days to get through the story bit, and I have a TBR as long as my arm, and I'm ill, and trying to get through these 50 pages, like, I really tried. And the way that I've kind of justified it to myself is that I will undoubtedly need to read this book again as a grown-up, because I want to be a politically educated and aware person as a grown-up. So I'm going to read this book again at some point in my life, and at that point I will read the appendix. Is C's things. Plural of appendix. But so on the very first page there's a quote there's a line that he wrote that says, "If you had asked me why I had joined the militia, I should have answered to fight against fascism. And if you had asked me what I was fighting for, I should have answered common decency." Now, that line at that point is about the fact that he wasn't kind of fighting for revolution, and he wasn't fighting to replace the fascists with kind of communist working class rule, but just to fight against fascism, because as we know, fascism, not good. But that line to me has a double meaning, and one that I think is really important. Fighting against fascism is incredibly important, but the idea that the reason you're fighting for isn't personal gain, it's common decency. He had no real ties to the Spanish Civil War. He was a relatively well-off human being, white male, in 20th century Britain. Like, he was doing pretty well for himself, despite being a very forward-thinking human being, and he sacrificed some of that. He put his life genuinely on the line repeatedly to go and fight against fascism in Spain during the revolution, and that just, that makes me really happy. Not that he attempted to sacrifice his life, but just that there have been, and there are, and there will continue to be people who are genuinely that passionate about the world not going to shit. So, I read this book, it was amazing, I loved it, and I think everyone should read it. I probably haven't said everything that I want to say, but I can't think of anything else right now. It was so good. Please read it, please talk to me about it. I am so keen to read more George Orwell, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.